everybody. Welcome back to the show, Science Facts and Fallacies, episode 252. My name is Cameron English. I'm your host as always. That's Dr. Liza Dunn, physician, toxicologist, really sharp lady. I really enjoy these conversations, Liza. It's great to see you. How are you?
Good. How was your week?
It was terrific. Today's Costco day, so I'm going to go buy like a whole drum of grapefruit juice for no reason except
and it
that
tastes
it's
good.
there.
You're going to load up on gasoline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I'm a doomsday planner, so I'm going to go buy all this stuff, like 1,000 pounds of cashews, just things you
That's
really
exactly
don't
right.
need. Yeah. I'm not going to buy either of those things, but it's
It is.
it's
Well,
fun
when
to
you're
talk about.
wandering through there, you pick up all sorts of stuff that you don't expect to pick up on the way. That's the
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah. That's the dad life. I love it. I love it. Out here in the suburbs, everyone hates on it. I don't care. It's awesome. All right. Let's get into our stories today. We've got 3 as always. So first up, can cannabis make your workout more productive? Next, whitewash how 4 journals and their academic enablers are corrupting reporting on science, chemicals, and crop biotechnology. And finally, Bill Gates and bug eating. Conspiracy theory claims billionaire wants to replace cattle with insect protein. What's the truth? Okay, let's start here up top, Liza. We are talking about
These are great topics.
2024. I love you, 2024. Apparently, people are trying to figure out what marijuana does to your workout. And this was actually a pretty interesting study. So this is by Lisa Marshall, Nicholas Gada, and it's CU Boulder today. Surprise, this study was conducted in Boulder, Colorado. Okay, anyways, so this is a study. It's 42 runners in the Boulder, Colorado area. They're all recreational marijuana users. So it's pretty interesting design. So they took these people, they did sort of like a baseline workout session to figure out how fit they are, get all kinds of measurements and survey data. And then they assigned them to go to a marijuana dispensary, and they got to pick out a strain of CBD or THC. And I'm drug stupid, Liza, so you can fill everyone in here. But THC is the ingredient that gets you high in marijuana. And I guess CBD has some of those same properties, but it's not
much, but yeah.
Right. So anyways, the idea was let's get people to use whichever of these they prefer and find out what it is that might be having this benefit or lack thereof. So they run for 30 minutes on a treadmill, and as they're doing this, they're periodically answering questions. How motivated do they feel? How much pain are they experiencing? Does the workout seem easier? Does it seem harder? Et cetera, these kind of questions. And of course, the spoiler here is that there was no benefit to the workout. They didn't get any more lifts in, or I guess it's running in this case, right? It wasn't a better workout. A lot of people reported feeling better. Some of them reported feeling less pain from running, doing that kind of chronic cardio. But interestingly, they all ran a few seconds slower.
Surprise.
So, right. And it's just so funny. And I mean, there's so many stupid pot jokes here, but the motivation seems to be for this. We need Americans to exercise more. We need to motivate them to get into the gym or whatever, on the running track, whatever. And they're thinking that maybe this is one way. This is one way to do it, right? Is if people are just sitting on the couch, if you tell them to get high first, maybe they will. Maybe they'll use that and go, okay, well, if I can get stoned, then I'll go do some deadlifts. One interesting thing, and I'll stop talking after this, was that a lot of people reported a slight reduction in pain. And there's been some recent research that suggests that your cannabinoid receptors naturally sort of regulate your pain. It used to be endorphins that experts thought were responsible for that runner's high that people get. So they're thinking maybe that's the same mechanism here. Is that you smoke pot and maybe that has some sort of a pain mitigation effect, something like that. But
I thought it was a kind of hilarious study, and I think that there are a lot of hilarious marijuana studies out there. Actually, my favorite marijuana study involved, I want to say, Danish military or Dutch military recruits who were they wanted to assess what their reflex time was when they were driving. So they had an arm where there was They were sober and not high. They had an arm where they drank screwdrivers, so vodka and orange juice, and then another arm where they ate pot brownies, and then did a simulated driving test.
No.
So they were not released out to the streets, but they did a simulated driving test, and they were significantly slowed down in the marijuana arm, so much so that one fellow went through 10 lights, red lights, very, very slowly, but went through all of them. So I would not, I don't think that marijuana, and nothing in this article makes me think that marijuana or any of its components are going to actually improve your exercise performance, especially if you're smoking it. Because there is so much more than THC and CBD in marijuana joint smoke. So I thought the article was funny because the concern is that everybody becomes a couch potato and people are sedentary anyway. That with the legalization of marijuana, this might be worse. I don't know that that it's going to really change that. And then in terms of marijuana is used as an appetite stimulant, right? And that's one of the reasons people get the munchies. And that's one of the reasons medical marijuana has been used in patients who have cancer and have cancer cachexia, get have a very wasted look because they're not eating enough. So it's supposed to be an appetite increaser. So I think you're not necessarily going to improve somebody's weight by recommending that people use marijuana prior to exercise. So I think that the study didn't show much. I think that the pain claim is tenuous at best in this. If I remember correctly, it was not statistically significant, but there were people who said that subjectively they felt that their pain was reduced.
Right.
But last but not least, I think that there's not good evidence that this is going to improve your exercise or your exercise tolerance. If anything, smoking marijuana over time is going to make your exercise tolerance worse because you're going to get pulmonary issues from inhaling tar and all of the carbon monoxide and all of the combustion chemicals that you inhale when you're inhaling marijuana.
Couple things that stuck out just in the design of the study is that they couldn't administer, or whatever you call it, they couldn't allow them to use the drug on campus where the study was conducted. They had to get high at home, and then the researchers had to send a canavan, they called it, to pick these people up because it's against federal law, which is just this.
That's right.
It's so adorable, right? Is that there's a federal law against distributing marijuana on college campuses, and I'm like, wow. That is working, guys. Keep it up.
That's working so well. And then the way they tossed the dice, they tossed dice to choose which particular product that they were going to use, and so I don't know that you can even compare the products when they went and made their selections. So it's a pretty hilarious study.
I also wonder because, like, in a clinical trial, if it's a vaccine or a drug, if people are getting the active ingredient, if they're in I forget the word, they're in the arm of the trial that's actually testing the drug, not the control group, they're getting the test group, right? It's been a long week. They get the same amount, it's the exact same active ingredient on purpose, and then in the control group it's nothing, whatever, sugar pill or whatever it is. But here I don't maybe they did, I don't know how you control for, like, are they getting the same amount of THC? Is it?
Yeah. That's the thing. You look at THC, you look at cannabis now that's coming out of dispensaries and things like that. You don't know if what other adulterants are in there. And they're not always adulterants, but, some supplements, stores have things that they add. So, for example, if you take a supplement that claims to have pain relief properties, often you can find active ingredients like Tylenol or ibuprofen or something like that, also that it's not disclosed on the label. So that's one of the things about these kind of supplementy studies is you actually don't know 100% what you're getting, which is you probably are a little bit better off in terms of understanding what's in there than what you're getting on the street, because on the street you can get some pretty bad adulterants. In fact, in Florida last year, but I think it was Florida, a bunch of folks wound up with head bleeds after having marijuana contaminated with rat poison, bromadiolone, which is a blood thinner. Yeah. So, yeah.
Wow. That's crazy. Well, there you go. If you enjoy smoking weed and working out, then good for you. I am good for eating salami by the fistful and watching YouTube videos when I smoke weed, which is why I don't do it. It just doesn't agree with me. So if you can run on a treadmill after taking a few drags off a...
More power to you.
Yeah. Not my party. But there you go. I mean,
neither.
Yeah, just take comfort in the fact that there are researchers wasting your money on these kind of silly studies. Okay. Speaking of wasted money and silly studies, let's talk about this next story. This is how 4 obstructionist journals and their academic enablers are corrupting reporting on the science of chemicals and crop biotechnology. This is by GLP publisher John Antine and Andrew Porterfield, whose work we've discussed before. Great science writer. Really love Andrew's stuff. They're talking here about 3 academic journals and then 1 news outlet that are the source of, I want to say, most of the nonsense that you read online about crop biotechnology and about pesticides. Most of it stems from this little cabal of people publishing in the same journal. So this is the summary that John and Andrew put on the story, and I just want to read it directly because it sums it up. So they say, this is a story about how a small, dogged group of environmental scientists and professors have perfected the art of manipulating journalists into misreporting the sustainable benefits of agriculture biotechnology. So they go on and they say there was a study published in 2022 by Joan Conroe and Mark Linus, who are with the Alliance for Science, which is a pro-science, I guess you could call them an activist group, whatever. They're at Cornell University, and they train journalists that live in Africa or from Africa to report accurately on these topics. They work with researchers. They try to get the public educated. So if they're trying to get a crop approved in a certain African country, they go in and actually try to shift the narrative so people understand the science and they're not bamboozled by Greenpeace or whomever. And interestingly, Mark Linus was with Greenpeace for years, and he's a conversion story of sorts, and this is why he pisses off all the activist groups so much, is because he came from that camp, and he goes, I was following the science on climate change, and I just listened to what the experts told me, and I wasn't doing that on agriculture. So now I do that on agriculture too. And
That's exactly right. I think he was doing research for a book or something like that, and realized that when he was reading the activist stuff, he was like, I'm not finding the literature to back this up. And the more he looked into it, the more he was like, oh, well, maybe I was wrong.
Right. Yeah, there's a talk he gave at Oxford or something in 2013 or so. It's on YouTube. He tells this whole story. It's really fascinating. But in any case, he did the study with Joan Conroe and then a data scientist they were working with in 2022. And they're trying to figure out how much of the media that people consume on certain science topics is incorrect or is deceptive in some way. And they found that for agriculture and for biotechnologies specifically, the media reports nonsense about 9% of the time. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're talking about, when compared to like vaccines and climate change and some other science topics, it's below 3%. So reporters tend to be better on those topics. They want to make sure they get the facts at least somewhat correct. But on biotechnology and pesticides, they seem to have less interest. And so what it comes down to is you end up with false balance, excuse me, in these news stories where, CBS, they'll quote someone like Liza, for example, and then they'll go to, Jim so-and-so from Greenpeace. And then these two perspectives are presented as these are equal sides in the debate, which, as we've talked about a lot, is not the case.
Or as the Boston Globe interviewed me, and then for a topic, and then interviewed Carrie Gillum as the as the opposing person. for a balance, even though she accepts anti-vaccine money and she is not involved with public health. They asked her, this was a health question that they were asking her about, and they didn't ask me about.
Yeah, not only does she have no experience or credentials, she's also a serial liar, and it's absurd. So yeah, big fan of Carrie's. Come on the show, Carrie. Would love to chat. Let's have a journalist on journalist discussion, and see where that goes. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting off topic and feisty.
That's all right.
so you end up with reporting on these topics where there's a lot of false balance. And what really happens, John and Andrew point out, is that you have these 3 journals, and we can talk specifically about them. There's 3 academic journals that are predatory journals, meaning they're pay for play. So you can go to them, you pay them $1,500 or $5,000, whatever they want, and they will almost always publish your article with very little peer review. So if you're an activist group and you want to make up a scare story about glyphosate or some other pesticide, you get your stuff published in these journals, then you get an activist group to put out a press release, and then the incompetents at CBS and CNN call you up and they go, tell us about your study. And then, right, here we are, right? Now we have fodder for our podcast because we have to talk about
dispelling myths, yes.
Right, pesticides cause autism or blah, 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 or your kids are going to be born naked and illiterate or whatever, right? There's always something. So that's the gist of the story. And John and Andrew go through these journals and they talk about the things they get wrong. Of course, endocrine disruption is one of their favorite topics to bring up. Whatever the chemical is, it probably has something to do with endocrine disruption. This is the go-to. And then they end with a challenge, which is fascinating. And they say, next time you read a story online and it's talking about chemicals disrupt your hormones, or they cause cancer, or they cause autism, look at the author of the story, look at the news outlet, and then look at the journal article that they're writing about. The chances are pretty good. It's
from one of those.
Yeah. So I'll stop. Go ahead, Liza. What'd you make of this?
Yeah, it shows you what kind of impact predatory publishing has on people, because people can really they are unscrupulous. They really use these articles that they write that are not peer reviewed to support their position that's unscientific, and they actually go and kind of seek out the press to really do kind of press conferences to get this going. And my big problem with this particular movement is they like to tag companies and say that companies are behaving nefariously. And that's just not the case, one. And they use these to stir up public sentiment. And what that is leading to for agriculture, well, let's back up a little bit. So Johnson & Johnson got sued for a science-free claim that baby powder causes cancer, right? And they have had multi-billion-dollar losses. They've taken baby powder off the market in the United States, and they spun off their consumer health division because of this litigation. And it's science-free litigation once again. It's one thing when baby powder goes off the market. It's an entirely different thing when you're talking about the most fundamentally important products that make food security possible. When you're making health claims that are not true about them, and you scare the population, and then you wind up that having taxpayer dollars going to reevaluations over and over and over again for decades to reestablish the safety profile and make sure that none of these claims are true. And then you still have public pressure to ban these products because of the fear that they've engendered. It's one thing if it's a consumer use thing, but when it's something as fundamentally important to food security and nutrition, and public health, because you can get infectious diseases and things like that from not being, insect-borne illness from not using pesticides, right? So the scope of this is much bigger, and the impact of this is much bigger. And I think people need to start really thinking critically about these claims. And this is why you're seeing all these farmer protests in the EU. because people are trying to push bad policy based on the information that's coming from these journals. And a lot of the people who are sort of thinking about making these policies, I think, are actually well intended because they're wanting to protect the environment and they want to protect public health. When they use these things, you actually really, really impact negatively food security globally. And all you have to do is look at Sri Lanka, and it's a cautionary tale. And I think that that's why you're seeing so much commotion in the EU with farmers because of poor policy making, because of things like this.
I sometimes don't know what to say about these topics because the level of corruption that goes on here, that's allowed to go on, is kind of stunning. And John and Andrew, they point to a journal called Environmental Health Perspectives, which I have been very vocal in criticizing in the past because this is a journal that's put out by the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, which is a federal agency. And they fund all sorts of research in toxicology and in related fields. And under a director named Linda Birnbaum, she was there for 10 years or so, 2009 to 2019, that time frame. And during her tenure there, she funneled millions and millions of dollars to researchers that she had relationships with who all had the same sort of anti-chemical perspective. So all kinds of dumb studies into BPA, which we talked about last week, a couple weeks ago, studies into pesticides. And if you look at a lot of this research or a lot of the commentary that's related to it, Linda Birnbaum's name shows up a lot of the time. So I have been told by some scientists that this journal is still reputable, that people in toxicology see value in reading the stuff that's there. So just to measure my criticism a little bit, there is some good and some bad. But nevertheless, the point here is that millions and millions of dollars of your money, it just goes into this black hole of research that produces no good. It helps lawyers file lawsuits.
And it's really problematic. It's really problematic for public health, and it makes people distrust regulatory agencies. It makes people distrust scientists. And once again, the things that they're focusing on, are undermine the really good science that goes behind all of this stuff. And I think it's very unfortunate. Everybody's upset with Big Pharma because of vaccines, because of similar kinds of claims, right? I'm not saying that Linda Birnbaum's done anything on vaccines, but that it's a similar tactic that people have used to gin up anti-vaccine sentiment, and it's targeted at pharmaceutical companies, and so I think it's just built. We need medicines, we need agriculture. We're, as a population aging, we need to be able to rely on a steady supply of high quality, very scientifically well researched medications and food. So this directly undermines that, and it's really, really unfortunate.
Yep. Yeah, it's preposterous. And another funny thing that just occurred to me is that you have, like, NIEHS will fund research, and then the activist groups will use that research to file petitions with the FDA or the EPA to say you should ban this chemical because it's bad based on this silly study. So then the government has to spend more money refuting the research that it funded in the first place. So it's a vicious cycle. Yeah, it's such a I don't know. The whole system is juiced up.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah. So there you go. Just read this article and be skeptical as always. Look at the journals, look at the quality of them. It takes a little bit of time, but you'll be better off in the long run.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Final story of the day, Bill Gates and bug eating. Conspiracy theory claims billionaire wants to replace cattle industry with insect protein. What's the truth?
Where to start with this one?
Okay. This is by Jessica Scott Reed, writing for Sentient magazine. which I'm not very familiar with. It seems to be sort of like a vegan-leaning, animal rights themed kind of a publication. So she's here talking about, and again, we've all heard this. There's lots of concern about people being forced to eat bugs, or they're going to ban meat, or you can take my burger from my cold dead hands, right? It's a real passionate argument that happens online, especially. So, as the title alludes to, Reed says, there's this widespread concern that billionaires are going to mandate everyone eat bugs, and she, sorry, summary. She says opposition to eating insects has colonialist roots. During colonization and industrialization, you had Western countries. They would go into poor countries and they would sort of force their cuisine and their culture on them, and then they would denigrate bug eating because it was gross, in quotes. So that's where the opposition really comes from. She wants you to know is that it's white people that don't like bugs, and then Now, she concedes, interestingly enough, that, the United Nations is telling everyone that we need to eat insect protein. And yes, the media is telling you we need to eat insect protein. And yes, celebrities are telling you that we need to eat insect protein. And yes, billionaires are spending money on all of these pro-insect campaigns. And yes, there are governments in Europe and around the world trying to restrict animal agriculture. But there's no conspiracy here. This is just about making food more sustainable. That's all it's about. So go back to the fever swamps with your crazy right-wing dreams. It's not happening. And you can read this article. I'm being a little.
But that's
sarcastic.
pretty much what the article says.
Yeah. So for example, she says during the COVID-19 pandemic, we had a fertile ground for the proliferation of conspiracy theories. She says it sort of sprung out of distrust in authority. We had political partisanship, online echo chambers, and misinformation. That sentence is just a code word for people I disagree with say things that are bad. Right?
That's right.
She doesn't care about partisanship. She cares about, right? My opponents are real partisans, and that's the problem with our political system. That's
right.
that's the point there. And again, she makes this clear. She references a bunch of conservative political commentators. I'm not terribly familiar with them, like Candace Owens, right? And Tucker Carlson. Everyone knows. I don't really follow these people, but she sort of anchors the opposition to eating insects in
that milieu, right?
Right. It's these strange fringe people. Like, never mind. Anyways, but she ends on an interesting note, which is that insects are intelligent. And I guess this implies that we really shouldn't be eating them. So she talks about
them either.
She talks about bees, for example. She cites Scientific American. I'd rather read a tabloid than Scientific American. But they point out that with bees, they can count, they can grasp concepts of sameness and difference, they can learn complex tasks by observing others, and they know
they nap in flowers.
Right.
They're bumblebees that nap in flowers.
They know their individual body dimensions, which is a capacity associated with consciousness in humans. And then she finally concludes and says, insects will probably never be a major food source. It's just that bugs are easy to demonize. So you have culture warriors that like to mock the elite, in quotes. So this, it's just a right-wing fever dream. So I don't really know what to make of all this. I mean, yes, all the examples you think of are actually happening, but it doesn't mean what you think, and you're crazy. And but you can't eat bugs because they're smart, and there you go.
So what's the solution?
I don't know.
there's a deficit in protein consumption as is, and what animal agriculture does is it puts animals on plots of land that are usually you can't grow fruits and vegetables or whatever, and that they convert grass into high quality protein that we can eat. And we've co-evolved that way. We started out as hunter-gatherers, right? So we've co-evolved with species that way. And these nutrients that come from animal ag are very, very important for brain health and growth and a whole variety of vitamin B12, which helps with immune function, all sorts of stuff. So it's really it's really interesting to hear this kind of discussion around insects. And I've heard these people all talk about the possibility of eating insects. Now, I don't think that they are all conniving to take over Aldi farms and start forcing people to eat bugs. But I think it is a discussion, and I think it's fascinating that the same group of people who's trying to make it more palatable are the ones that are also saying there's an insect apocalypse going on. So how are you going to feed? If you think about, I saw a great graph on Twitter the other day, on X the other day, that was talking about how many different kinds of animals are eaten globally, right? And it does this huge graph, and that's largely where most of our protein comes from. And I was thinking, how many insects would you need to eat to match that? It'd be an enormous amount of insects, right? To match that protein content. And if you how would you grow all that, right? Where would that all come from? If you had insect farms that were growing all that, what would you do if there was an escape? And how would you not turn that into an invasive species? And insects carry pathogens like, a fly. If you got a house fly carrying manure pathogens, E. coli, on its wings or its feet or whatever it landed on, you've got an infectious disease risk. Shigella, nobody wants bloody diarrhea, right? So, how do you control for that? How do you control sure that their microbiome is not affecting your microbiome, right? So there's that, and then there's cross reactivity between shellfish allergy and insect consumption. So they've got all the things that people are worried about in the food supply anyway, and I think that it's, once again, it's the same people who are saying there's insect apocalypse, but go ahead and eat insects, and we can't eat meat. So I can see where people start getting kind of concerned about the wisdom of these decisions.
Yeah, that's the thing that really bugs me about this story. And I think it illustrates why the media industry is imploding. Right? The Los Angeles Times just laid off a bunch of people. Sports Illustrated folded entirely. BuzzFeed gave up its entire news operation. Massive layoffs in the media industry. And I think this story, Sentient's a relatively small publication, but it's this sort of smugness and ignorance and condescension towards normal people. This is why most people listen to Joe Rogan.
That's exactly right.
Or get their news on Twitter, is because these people are so, I don't know, they're so judgmental, but they're stupid. They're wrong. Like this article, and I want to go through a couple examples here. So she points out that, the case for eating insects, it's really based on the fact that the global population is going to explode and we need to feed all these people, blah, blah, blah. This is a study from the middle of 2020. Here's the BBC headline: fertility rate, jaw-dropping global crash in children being born. So the study projects, and this is published in The Lancet. So this is like, right, every progressive activist journalist quotes The Lancet because that's their, right, as far as the mainstream gets, this is as reputable as it gets. So they point out that they expect, these demographers, they say the number of people on the planet is going to peak at 9.7 billion around 2064. Then it's going to fall to 8.8 billion by the end of the century, and then it's going to decline precipitously unless we institute some major changes, because people are just having fewer kids. People get wealthier. They don't need family around as much to meet their basic needs. We have better healthcare, as we've pointed out a lot. Now, that's all great. I don't want to undo any of that, of course.
No, right. Yep.
But we have fewer people. So the point here is that the premise of this is that we all have to start eating larvae because these cows, they fart so much and they burp so much and there's just so much methane. Don't you know about the methane? There's too many people and they're all eating the cows. It's not true. It's not true, right? And it's not just like, oh, the population's leveling out. No, we have a problem that in the next decades you're going to start to feel, because old people need lots of healthcare and they need lots of assisted living. And there's more of them than there are younger people being born and entering the workforce to supply all the resources they're going to need.
That's right.
So all the while that these people are going on and they're lecturing you about how racist you are for liking hamburgers, this is the real crisis on the horizon. So
that is the real crisis on the horizon. And China is recognizing that. China, in fact, has just I just approved using or growing their own GMOs. I think isn't that right? That I saw that somewhere. So they're starting to realize that in order to maximize their productivity, they're going to have to do things that they have been traditionally resistant to, and because you got to feed all these people, and you've got to make it efficient because you've got fewer people to do the work.
It's a very real problem. It's a very real problem. Now, she says nothing about that. She just sort of takes for granted that the population's going to explode. And right, you silly rubes, that's why they want you to eat insects. It's not because they're going to force them on you. It's just there's just so many people. I couldn't be bothered to do a basic Google search, and my editors didn't care to fact check my story before it went online. But I'm just so much smarter than you. Here's another thing. I never get tired of bashing this colonialism thing. This is just so stupid. This argument has nothing to do with racism. It has nothing to do with forcing Western culture on people from Africa or India or any other part of the world. Here's just one example, and I think you've talked about this before too. But the Maasai in Africa, it's a very very well known community. They're primarily in Kenya and northern Tanzania. Their diet consists almost entirely of milk, meat, and blood. Very well documented.
Yep.
So right, not everyone eats like that, but I mean, it's not to say that like meat consumption is this Western thing where like you can't have bugs anymore. The Lion King is over. Now you're going to eat steak because we're in charge.
No,
it's not. Doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way.
And there are the Maasai and then in the Sahel where you don't grow a lot of grass. You can't grow, watermelon and a lot of crops there, right? Or lots of vegetables and fruits. So you've got whole communities that really depend on livestock for their survival. So it just is the way it is.
Yeah, another thing that in this very same debate, people will point out that agricultural CO2 emissions or greenhouse emissions are quite high. Now, what they won't tell you is that one of the reasons for that is that most of the world, not most, but a good chunk of the world is still developing, so their economies are mostly agrarian. All of their economic output is agriculture, which means that most of their emissions are coming from breeding and raising animals and growing crops to feed the animals.
Okay? Crops, yes.
Right. So in other words, there's lots of people that rely on animals for their welfare, and they eat animals and they feed animals to their families. Again, no discussion of this in the article. It's just sort of like, don't you, us fact checkers, we figured this out. So just
trust us.
Yeah. No, thanks. Let's see, a couple other things. And by the way, I'm not saying that, you're the real colonialist because you're trying to force your ideas. Like, that's not the point I'm making. My point is just shut up and find another.
That's exactly right.
Find another drum to beat. I'm just so tired of talking about this.
I think that we have had such success at maximizing our agricultural output that it has helped women and children get off the land and go to school and be able to participate in society in different ways. And the people who are doing agriculture now are really professionals, and they love what they do. 2% of the population feeds us, and that has liberated huge swaths of the population to go and be able to write articles like this, right? Whereas in the global south, you've got women and children often tethered to the land in order to, feed themselves. There's this romanticization of subsistence farming. And when those people are offered the same technologies that we have, you could really help them get food security and lift themselves out of poverty. Food is the foundation of civilization. And if you can help people be more productive, that's a good thing for globally. And you can do it the more efficient you make it, the less land you need, the less water you need, the less pesticide you need. You can turn this into a cycle that's virtuous, and the whole society comes up. But there's so much suspicion around because of journals like the previous topic we were talking about, or it's taken as gospel truth and propagated through the media. Those journals will be taken as gospel truths and propagated through this kind of outlet. And I happen to think that the people who suffer most are poor people.
Yeah. Just to put a bow on this, because I kind of went off there for a second. It's not that, and I think you alluded to this earlier, it's not that Bill Gates sits in his office and he's like, I'm going to force them all to eat bugs. But it's very clear that there is a push to restrict animal agriculture.
Yes.
As we're seeing right now in Europe, there are farmers clogging up freeways and shooting manure at government buildings. Okay. So there are real efforts to restrict how farmers operate. Yeah. And there's attempts to take their land away. And you know what I mean? So there are real restrictions going into place. You have people that are very powerful and very wealthy talking about how awesome it is to eat crickets. There was a video a few years ago of Nicole Kidman eating mealworms, right? Why do you think Nicole Kidman's on TV eating mealworms? Is it because it's just quirky? No, it's because they're trying to normalize eating bugs, okay? Yeah. So it may not be some deliberate Alex Jones type conspiracy theory, but there is a very open push away from animals and towards insects.
That's true.
So I think all that to say, she could have engaged with serious people instead of framing this as, it's those right wingers. It's like, no, like whatever. Those people are kind of weird sometimes, but let's have the discussion where it actually exists.
And I think that one of the things that I'm really seeing a lot more and more and more is if anybody who so nobody's talking to the farmers about these policies. And so now the farmers are out on the streets going, wait a minute, this is our livelihood and this is your food supply. And you need to come talk to us about what we do and why we do it before you make these policies that are going to impact the public like this, right? Yeah. And so, but they're being labeled as right wing, far right, Nazis. The Guardian's got a whole bunch of commentary on this, and George Monbiot or something like that is out there. Is out there making all these claims about these farmers. The Guardian, it gets its money from the same organizations that these people are accusing. Anyway, so this Guardian's getting money from the same organizations that the first article we talked about referred to. Yeah. The same. It's the same group. The same group is anti-modern agriculture. It's anti the current regulatory establishment, and it's anti-business. And so they are stringing this all together, and they paint anyone who disagrees with them with a right-wing label. And instead of being able to have a conversation anymore, people are more and more polarized. And I wish that academics and journalists would spend a little time critically thinking about these things and talking to people who might have a slightly different opinion, but may have some really good scientific basis for that opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, I know I just spent the last 20 minutes utterly trashing the story, but come on and let's dialogue.
Yeah, let's talk. We'd be happy to talk to her. We're happy to talk to anybody.
Yeah, no one takes us up on it though, right? They all they all know we're shills and we're corrupt to the core, but they don't want to talk. Anyways, if you guys want to talk to us, we're happy to chat. We're on social media. It's at Dr. Liza MD on X, Twitter. I'm at Cam J English. At Genetic Literacy is Genetic Literacy Project. They put this whole show on. It's all their content that we're discussing here. So thank you very much to them for that platform. We'll be back next time. And until then, have a good
week. Bye-bye.